So after 8.5 years in charge at Anfield, Jurgen Klopp will take charge of his final game as Liverpool manager on Sunday when the Reds face Wolves at Anfield, and I'm sure it's going to be an incredibly emotional occasion, the marking of an end of a hugely successful era for the Reds and the loss of a hugely charismatic manager as well. I'm sure there's going to be tears in the stands. I'm sure Jurgen Klopp might shed a tear or two himself, and also the same for a lot of the staff who are leaving, and also the players as well who are losing a great manager. It's going to be an incredible day, I'm sure. And I thought, because this era is coming to an end, I thought it was a really good time to sort of look back and reflect. And as a reporter who's been covering Liverpool for well over a decade now, I thought it's a good time for me to reflect on what this means for me, what my interactions with Jurgen Klopp down the years have been like, what it was like to meet him, how it's been to work with him closely, and try and give you guys a little bit more of an insight into what he's like as a character and what he's like to work with. As I say, you do see a lot of him on the TV, and to be honest, he is that person in real life. But there are moments and situations I've been in with Jurgen Klopp that I thought were worth sort of putting on record, and as I say, maybe give you guys a little bit more of an insight into what he's like as a character. Now, I've worked for various publications down the years, but when Jurgen Klopp arrived at Anfield, I actually was just at the start of my career, having working for Liverpool Football Club itself. I worked for the website there, so that was my job at the time when he came in. I was an employee of the club, and it was I do remember, recall meeting him for the first time. He held a press conference, and it was in the Reds lounge of what was then called the Centenary stand, now the Sir Kenny Dalglish stand. And beforehand, we were sat in a room sort of to the side of that, preparing and putting the stuff together for the website for the press conference and previewing that. And he walks into the room, and immediately I was kind of struck by, this guy's got a real charisma. I can see why players would run through brick walls from him. And that sounds like a story you kind of make up, but I genuinely maintain that it was instant. You can tell this guy has an aura about it. I mean, Adam Lallana spoke about a similar thing in a piece of the Times about that. As soon as you meet Jurgen Klopp, you get that feeling that he does have that aura, that charisma, as I say. And I think it kind of helps that he's tall, he's physically imposing. I think that almost gives him authority in the dressing room as a father figure, and also whenever he meets new people. And he is, you know that from down the years, his television interviews and what he's generally like, is he is quite charming as well. And so, I remember he introducing himself to all the website staff, walking around, shaking hands with everyone, big smile on his face. Really did seem sort of pleased to be there, which is an encouraging sign, because it's easy to forget that at the time Liverpool were really struggling. They had a bad few years, hadn't won a league title for way over 2 decades, so it wasn't a club that was on the surface immensely attractive in comparison to other Premier League clubs. But he, as I say, really was pleased to be there. And I remember thinking that day, actually, along those lines, is that the position that Liverpool were in, I know they'd had the title challenge in 13-14, but that just felt like a little bit of a fluke to me. And to be honest, my expectations around Klopp at that time was more, if you can turn Liverpool into a solid Champions League club, if they can qualify for that a few years on the bounce, then that would be really good progress. And then in maybe a couple of years' time after that, or a few years' time after that, another manager could come in and maybe win the league. But I just couldn't imagine that you could oversee the kind of transformation that we've seen. I mean, people will maybe take that for granted given Liverpool's position now, and the fact that they're seen as definitely one of the biggest clubs in Europe again, but not just in terms of status and fan base, but also in terms of actual recent success. And as I say, I kind of thought, if you can get top 4 consistently, that would be a great achievement and a really good basis for Liverpool. But obviously, he said in his press conference in the Reds lounge when he sat there, he said, I think if I'm sat here in 4 years, we'll be talking about a title, which I thought was incredibly sort of ambitious to say that. I do think it kind of got misinterpreted as well. When he said a title, I don't think he meant the Premier League title. He just meant any sort of trophy. He thought that they could get one of those on board. Obviously, in the end, he kind of did a lot more than that, but I thought it was interesting, the self-confidence he had. And again, that was something that really struck me when I first met him, and I think that's something that's come across since. And you need that as a leader, you need that to drag people forward. So that was immediately apparent. Now, obviously, over the following weeks and months, we got to see a little bit more of Jurgen as the weeks passed. So some days we used to work at Melwood and we sat around the training ground. We had this little office towards the back that was just tucked away, a little bit of a dingy office, to be honest. Obviously the training ground much more fancy these days, but Melwood was looking a little bit tired at the time, and we were tucked away in that office, and Jurgen actually used to come into the office to smoke out on the balcony, because it was the only area he had a balcony that he could go out onto. And so he used to come out to there, and he talked to us as staff and say about, I remember some of the things he would ask us about, question us about things around Liverpool, what things are like. And one of the things I remember him asking us about is in the build-up to his first Merseyside derby, actually, is talking about, kind of what is it like, what's the atmosphere like around the game, what's the rivalry like around the years, and sort of reflecting on what that was like similarly to Dortmund and Schalke, which is a rivalry they have in Germany that he was obviously part of. And we were trying to, maybe explain the differences there, the fact that, Everton, it was known as the friendly derby. I'm not so sure it's as friendly anymore, but that it was a different derby to that maybe you would find in other cities, and definitely different to what you'd find in Germany in terms of the proximity of the two clubs. And the fact that he was asking questions about that, I thought again was really interesting, because I think it says a lot about, he didn't want to just come in and manage this football team and try and make them successful. It was all about, he wanted a deeper understanding of the club, a deeper understanding of the city. And I think, we talk about the emotional connection he has with the supporters, and I think a big part of that is wanting to learn more about what Liverpool means. And I think, again, you could see it through that interaction in the fact he's asking, the website staff about things like that. I think that says an awful lot about him as a character. And again, we saw, more and more examples of this as the season went on. I was there after the Europa League final when there was a party that was held in the hotel where the players were staying after the match. And obviously Liverpool had been beaten by Sevilla. They'd lost in the League Cup final prior to that, and obviously the mood was a little bit low in the place. Obviously everyone was happy that, okay, there's been some excitement in it to finish off this season. They've done quite well to get to 2 finals. The future's looking bright, but to miss out on 2 trophies obviously was some real disappointment there. And it's gone down a little bit in Liverpool folklore, and I know it's been written about by some journalists before, but I was in that party when it took place, and obviously Jurgen Klopp picks up the mic and he's trying to lift the mood, and he goes on talking about a speech that obviously I kind of wish I'd recorded it for posterity. It was so sort of inspirational, but I remember thinking, he was saying that this is just the start of something. There's so much more to come. Things are just going to get better from here, and as I say, this is just the start. And by the end of that, everyone was on the roof, and kind of absolutely, he built everyone in the room up like we were the bunch of players. All of us were up and feeling really positive, and obviously he finished it off by singing "We Are Liverpool" as well to everyone. So again, he'd taken on board what the fans were doing. He's listening to what's going on in the stands. He wants, and he just created that unity through singing that song, and the players were singing it, the staff were singing it all together, and it was just a moment that sort of really united everyone, and sort of really, really instilled that belief that good things were coming under this manager, which obviously absolutely proved to be the case. Now, the season after, obviously 2016-17, Liverpool qualified for the Champions League. Huge achievement to get back in there. He'd got his team together. He played a really exciting style of football. Liverpool were thrilling that season. They had to really work hard to get in that top 4 as well. It gets forgotten that I think they had to get 76 points and Arsenal got 75. They only just slipped out, and I think 76 is the highest it's ever been to get into the top 4. So that was a really, really big achievement again, and obviously one that the manager was really satisfied with. And I remember another sort of personal memory was the immediate aftermath of that game. Liverpool, it's the win over Middlesbrough that sealed the top 4. We actually flew out for a post-season friendly in Sydney, which you might remember. Obviously not something that Jurgen Klopp would have allowed in his latter years in charge. That was very much a hangover from the Brendan Rodgers era, and had been booked in around that time, so he had to go along with that. But I remember out on the flight to Sydney as well, interviewing Jurgen Klopp. Got to come up to the front and interview him for a piece for the website, talking about how Liverpool had got to the top 4, what the big tests in the season were, what that was all like. And he's so open, so funny. The usual, the charmingness was there. And we're on a flight out to Sydney. It takes obviously hours and hours to get out there, and he was willing to give his time up on the flight to talk about that and go into detail with it. We were sat there and we had a beer and chatted over the season, and it was just hugely helpful. And it showed, again, his willingness to help us out as a website staff. He didn't need to do that, but he did it because he knew it would be really helpful to us. And again, he was so open in his answers and gave a really good interview, which is absolutely typical of him. So that again, sort of underlines his character, I think. And of course, obviously, it's not always been completely positive in the journalist-manager relationship. You'll have seen him many a time had a few sort of choice words with some of the journalists, and a few, well, not quite arguments, but disagreements in press conferences. And I myself haven't been immune from that. I remember back in the 2018-19 season when Liverpool drew 0-0 at Goodison Park, and effectively the result that cost them the title that season, unfortunately. But I remember asking Jurgen if he would, if he felt that he maybe should have thrown on another attacker late in the game, and you can find this clip if you look for it. If you search this quote, PlayStation football, that was what he said to me. He said, "This is not PlayStation football," and kind of dismissed that. I would, do we go crazy now with 8 or 9 games to go, and gave me a little bit of a public dressing down at Goodison Park, if I'm honest. But I think, the thing I take away from that is, it'd be easy to sort of hold a grudge, wouldn't it? But look, these are extremely competitive people, aren't they? Football managers who reach that elite level. He's obviously disappointed with the result. I'm poking the bear a little bit with a question that I know is probably going to rile him a little bit, but I know I'm going to get a great answer if he does get a bit riled. And so it's that relationship where it works in that way. I'm not too disappointed coming away from that moment when the press conference ends, because I think, look, I've got a great answer out of him there. It's, we get to say Jurgen Klopp in a bust up with a journalist. We get to write it up in that way. And I know that's just how that interaction works sometimes. And, as I say, he's uber competitive. I fully expected him to be very disappointed after that result. And it's our job to sort of ask difficult questions. So, didn't take that one personally. And again, it just shows that Klopp, how much he wants to win. And again, that is a key part of his personality. He doesn't like losing. He doesn't like dropping points if he can avoid it. Particularly if it's a game against Everton, where it's obviously a local derby as well. So I just think that, again, showed you a little bit more about Jurgen, a little bit of an insight that we got into him and what he's like. And maybe have a look for that quote and the question if you can for the video. It's amusing to see me get the dressing down maybe. But again, obviously, even though you have those moments, those difficult moments, sometimes moments where he takes exception to a question, always sort of came back to being a really warm character, a great guy. And sort of the thing I remember the most about this, and probably my number one memory actually of interacting with Jurgen, is being stood in the mix zone in Madrid after Liverpool had won the Champions League, and he had to, all the players and all the manager and the coaching staff all had to walk through that section to get out of the stadium to go and start the party after the match. And I remember standing in the mix zone looking to the bit where the players are about to come out, and all of a sudden Jurgen comes out with a big grin on his face and immediately spots me and walks over, big shake of the hand, grabs me in for a Klopp hug. And to say that the manager of Liverpool Football Club has grabbed you in for a hug after winning the European Cup, only the 6th time that's ever happened in Liverpool's history. And obviously a Klopp hug is a very famous thing. I just think that's a memory I'll absolutely cherish, because he knew that us as a bunch of journalists, as a big group of us there who went through and hugged us all, and that we'd followed the journey from the very start, that we'd been there from the ups and the downs and sort of been on that journey. And I think collectively you always sort of tend to want the team to do well as well. It's much more fun to report on a winning team. So it sort of made it feel like we were very much part of the journey as well. And he gives that vibe off. He always makes you feel like you're part of it. And as I say, that Klopp hug, I'll probably be talking about that in a few years from now. It's a really sort of one of the great moments of my journalistic career, even though it's not quite probably about journalists, to be honest, and obviously about journalism rather. So obviously there were more big moments from then. Obviously the season after, Liverpool go on to win the title, absolutely running away with it. And I think one of the sole regrets really of the Jurgen Klopp era is that he didn't get to lift that trophy in front of fans. I mean, I was one of the few people, there's only a few hundred in the stadium that night that got to see Liverpool lift that trophy. I was there reporting on the game and got to see that, and I'll be always be eternally grateful for that. But I do think it's as I say, a real shame that Jurgen Klopp didn't get to celebrate that, because I just think he's someone who values the fans so much and the part that they play in the journey, and to not get a full Anfield seeing him lift that Premier League trophy after such a long wait for Liverpool, as I say, that is a little bit of a sadness. But as I say, I do feel personally very lucky to have been there to see it. But it could have been so much better, couldn't it? It's one of the things, the only things really in the Jurgen Klopp era you look back on with a little bit of a tinge of sadness. But yeah, just one of those things that couldn't be avoided. And at the end of the day, the record books will always show that he was the manager who ended that league title drought. So I think, you know, they'll never be able to take that away from him. Now, just want to go into a few other things around Jurgen being the manager as well, in terms of, obviously, I think press conferences is one of the big ones in terms of our interactions with him, and always, you know, always been a guy who's given great answers, not just on the football side of things, and not always just been honest around those things, but also around social issues. And I think, again, that is one of the things that's really sort of ingratiated him to Liverpool supporters. He's willing to talk about all sorts of issues, you know, whether they're political or not. You know, one of the things I remember in terms of my career as well was asking him a question about the COVID jabs, and you know, would he ever sign a player who wasn't willing to get that, given it would effectively rule them out of taking part in European competition at that time, because there were a few rules and restrictions around that, and travel, if you remember. And he gave a great, really detailed answer on that, which, you know, is I ended up on the back page of the Sundays, which is what I was writing for at the time, which was a, you know, big deal for me personally. But you know, it wasn't that it was a great question or anything like that. It was just a surface level question on what Jurgen Klopp's thoughts on the COVID jabs were, or you know, and it could have been any issue, by the way. But the fact he gave such a detailed, great answer, and was willing to go into something that wasn't just about football, it was about a bigger issue than that, I think that speaks volumes about Jurgen Klopp and why he was so great to deal with. He gave a great answer that, you know, got me on the back of a national newspaper for the first time. So a big moment in my career. But again, that wouldn't happen without Jurgen Klopp being so willing to talk about other things than football, and to be able to give such a lucid and detailed answer, and really sensible answer as well. I just thought, you know, again, that really sort of sums him up. And I think, you know, I've touched on the idea that he can be tetchy in some press conferences, can tetchy in post-match interviews he does with broadcasters. A lot of that with the broadcasters is that he's got to do about 8 or 9 interviews after a game, which is, you know, it's a lot to put on him. And I do think sometimes, you know, in the tougher seasons we've seen a little bit more of that side of him. But again, I go back to the idea that, you know, people try to say sometimes, oh, the mask has slipped, or maybe this is what Jurgen Klopp is really like behind the scenes. He's not this gregarious character, but we see so much of him down the years that we know he's that good, positive, warm character. That the reality is, as I say, that he's a competitive freak like any other elite level manager. He doesn't like losing. He doesn't like being asked about certain things that are to do with that. And he doesn't like being asked things that he perceives as a stupid question. Sometimes that's unfair on his part, by the way. But I think, you know, it's understandable that when you get a mic thrust in front of your face in some of those situations, that you aren't going to be the best version of yourself. And the reality is that, you know, they've been rare, really, that he's been like that. The majority and most of my interactions, 99% really, have been with a character who's been, as I say, warm, really kind, really, you know, generous with his time, and just really, really good to deal with. And you know, as much as Liverpool are going to miss a great manager, which is absolutely, you know, Jurgen Klopp will go down as one of the great Liverpool managers, one of the great managers, full stop, I think, in football history, with what he's done and the clubs he's taken on. You know, but he will also go down, I think, as courteous and funny, and all those, you know, great things that people do remember about his personality, because that has been absolutely my experience of him. And you know, more than anything, I kind of worry. You know, I cherish those memories, and I'm sure a lot of fans will feel the same. But I also kind of worry for the guy who's got to come next in Arne Slot. You know, he's not got to be just as good of a football manager, which is a huge test, but he's got to be as good a character, and that is going to be really, really difficult to find, I think, because Jurgen Klopp is, for me, an absolute one-off, and it's been a real pleasure to work with him down the years as a Liverpool reporter. So that's my sort of summary of the Jurgen Klopp era from my perspective as a journalist. Do let me know in the comments. I'm sure you've got so many personal stories about Jurgen. You know, some of you may have even met him or bumped into him, or watched your great memories of the games down the years, and or you know, interviews he's given or quotes. You know, what are your favourite memories of Jurgen Klopp as Liverpool manager? If you can like and subscribe as well if you've enjoyed this video. There's so much more to come on the channel, because we're heading to transfer period now, so I've got so many more insights to provide on that when it comes around. So stay tuned for all that. And of course, we're not just finished with the Jurgen Klopp, or quite finished with the Jurgen Klopp era just yet, are we? There's obviously one more game to go, so I will be at Anfield for that as well, and also for the press conference to preview it. So stay tuned for all that. I'll see you guys very, very soon.